Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Brian. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from Chips, Bedřich Smetana, with the track Vltava. So Smetana is a Czech composer, and we're going to be listening to one of the tracks from a 1990 performance by the Czech Philharmonic Orchestra. So, let's dive into this and see what's going on. Just gorgeous. We got the plucked violins in the back, just providing all this levity that, of course, we're also getting in the flutes. The swells, yes. Got the triangle player in the back. I hear you. I hear you. Okay. A lot of stretching of time. We got to return to the flurry. Brass is coming in strong though. Very adventurous, but light. We got the timpani in the back. Just the sheer dynamic qualities. Yeah, those offbeat accents and the flute, just keeping it really light and peppy. This is quiet. The beauty being born out of that moment of darkness or uncertainty. It's very delicate right now, taking its time, finding its place. Yeah, going back to that vibrant, victorious sounds. Back to this motif, okay. It's interesting how the swirling lines take on different characteristics depending on the emotional atmosphere. Oh, that's fun. Okay. Come on. Oh, okay, I see. We're gonna build up to the resolution. I'm bringing back the swirling again. Oh, yep. What a tease. A full minute of like half cadences, false endings, uh directing to resolution and not, I mean that's technically a half cadence, but directing to resolution and not getting there. And even just the gentle creep towards the resolution in our flute line there at the end, and then of course after we finally resolved this thing that we've been just like teetering on the edge of for 30-40 seconds now. And then, of course, just had to get in a proper orchestral stinger to end it as well. Just. Oh, man. I don't know if it was intended to be comical, but it's like a comedy skit that just it doesn't end. You think you hear a punchline, but it actually wasn't the end of the joke, and you hear something else. Like, oh, that's kind of funny too. But then the comedian doesn't stop talking, and it just keeps going and going and going. And by the time you get like a minute in, you're like, now just the sheer audacity and length of the joke and all of the false punchlines throughout are becoming the joke. And that's what this felt like. It was just so many teases at a finality. Everything could have been an ending in the last 30 to 60 seconds, and yet none of them were except the ending. That was the final points. There were so many final points before that, and it becomes obscene and absurd. No, maybe not necessarily obscene. It becomes absurd at a certain point, and reaches comedic levels, for me at least. But it also effortlessly matches the story I had in my head this entire time. I'm curious what other people saw or felt while listening to this. I encourage everyone to put into the comments if they had a narrative in their head or a series of emotions that they felt um, kind of dominated the song for them before I go about explaining mine and kind of compare and contrast after the video goes live and I can read some of y'all's comments. because I'm curious. Usually I just come right, I'm like, this is what the song was to me. And then I kind of get the feeling, sometimes people just, oh, that's it. That makes perfect sense, and they sort of adopt it. But I want to know your thoughts before I tell you mine. Just kind of curious about that. Anyways, let's get into this. This is a phenomenal track. It's kind of interesting though too, because we just got done on Saturday looking at an album that came out just a few years after this performance. Actually, it was '95, and I had a tough time appreciating it on its own merits, just because I'm so far divorced from it, from its release and the context around the release and the culture around its release. A lot of it feels both dated and trite to me. Um, and I've seen a lot of comments on the other side of that as well. People who were there and um, kind of talk about how influential it was. But for me, listening to it during that reaction, I'm just too far displaced to feel the impact of its presence. And it might have been the first, but to me, it sounded trite. It sounded like things I've heard a million times before. And that's sort of what's happening here, I think. I don't know when this was originally written. Um, Smetana was alive between 1824 and 1844, but I'm not seeing a date for when this specific composition was made. Also, the description here is not in English, so I'm just trying to parse. Oh, it's in French. I'm trying to parse numbers out of it. um, it's possible he wrote this when he was 47. Um, so that would have put it 1860s-ish, 1870s. I'm trying to place that into context with the classical history I know. Because the thing is that there's a lot of ideas in here that to me are kind of tropey, but I've also listened to a lot of music that might have come out after this that I've heard these ideas before, and I don't know if this was just a really great iterative use of these ideas. Because I say tropey, right? I say trite, um, basically meaning that I've heard these ideas so many times that they're becoming routine in a way for this style. And I don't want anyone to walk away from this thinking that I meant that in a negative way. You can certainly do things other people have done in new ways or in better ways. And this is absolutely a phenomenal piece. I have nothing but praise to say for this, both the writing and the performance itself. But there are a lot of ideas in here that I've heard many times. And those two are not mutually exclusive. It can rely on tropes and standardized ideas while still being a brilliant composition. So I just want to get that out of the way. So now let's actually dive into this. There is one idea that is present in like 80% of this, and that is the cycle, the whirlwind, the flurry. I used quite a few different words for it, but it's this idea of running up to a higher note, coming down to a lower note, going back up to that higher note in this cycle. It is actually the very first motif that we hear. It comes out of our flutes, and we start with one flute doing it, and then we trade off when it hits its final note. Another flautist comes in and starts it again until it ends up being a non-stop idea. It requires multiple people to do. There might be, yeah, you can do circulatory breathing, but what I heard was two flutes because there was always an overlap at the end of a phrase and at the beginning of the next. But yeah, we start out with a single cycle, and then a double cycle, and then just infinite, just constantly rising and falling, rising and falling. And the way that they're running up, it isn't just linear, where each note is higher than the last, and then each note is lower than the last. It's sort of like zigzagging up there. Sometimes you go up, sometimes you come down. And so it feels less like a curve and more like a whirlwind, sort of like a spiral. Sometimes, I mean, you are definitely in the end rising up to a pitch higher than when you started, but not every single rise up is going to be directly upward movement. Sometimes you get parallel movement where you kind of stay on the same x plane while minorly moving on the y plane, which doesn't really make sense when we're talking about like pitch, but I hope that makes sense in a way. And that's what I feel in a lot of this is the wind. This idea starts out in the flutes, it gets pushed over to the string section. Clarinets get it one time. I don't think I ever heard brass doing it. Definitely more of the lighter lighter instruments. I think that'd be, yeah, the two woodwinds and sax. I don't remember hearing sax doing it. Kind of don't remember hearing sax. There had to have been sax in there. It's a Philharmonic orchestra. But anyways, yeah, clarinets, flutes, and strings, particularly violins, I think, were the ones that got to do this, and it was present in like 80% of the sections. And sometimes, here's the cool thing, right? We already have this idea of variation. We have the one loop, the two loops, and then the infinite cycle of just like keeping this constantly going. But the thing is that we don't ever, or we don't always have just one idea going. There's frequently times where I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. This is going to be a split brain thing going on. There will be two groups of instruments doing this idea. One will start at the bottom, rise up, and come back down. The other starts at the top, falls, and comes back up. So you get this really cool, like, dual movement. And this really feels like a whirlwind to me because it feels like you're constantly rising and falling simultaneously. It's sort of like being stuck in a wind tunnel and air is just being pushed at you, and you're sort of just bobbing around this midpoint where you're consistently falling and rising, flying simultaneously. Um, and then we also have moments where multiple instruments are doing it. We have it where the same instrument is doing it. We have harmony within it. It's an idea that is ever present through this track and has heavy variation played on it. It is, to me, the heartbeat of the song. It's not the heartbeat, it's the core, it's the heart of the song. It is what everything is based around. The only time we don't have it is in the more dangerous section we had close to the end, probably about 60 or 70% in, when everything sort of came down and we explored a quieter soundscape, we explored some darker chord progressions, we explored some tense note intervals, and really started building a contrast to everything else. So it makes sense that this flurry, this whirlwind aspect, is removed from there as well. But as soon as we get out of that, we come back into the ending, the final couple of minutes, we hear it again. And so I keep using the words flurry and whirlwind, and it 100% reminds me of wind in so many ways. Even just visually, the sound themselves reminds me of tornadoes, but even just the visual concept of it from the very beginning of the song, introducing us to this motif itself, I thought of a leaf falling and being dragged on a journey on the back of the wind, and sort of exploring multiple landscapes and going on this little adventure of which it has no control over. It is completely at the whims of where the wind takes it. And we'll further explore this visual narrative I got while listening to this. But yeah, just the idea of wind and breezy days, forests, plains, hills, just lots of just really beautiful naturey areas, untouched by the industrial element of humanity, is what I got in this. And it's entirely because of this whirlwind motif, this flurry that's just ever present. Now, one thing I really love, I gotta point it out, the auxiliary percussion is pretty much what I expected in here. We had some cymbal work. I'm pretty sure we heard some orchestral bass drum and a snare. There was timpani in here. I love the timpani. It's just those really big boom, 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 boom. When you think of those really big, epic drum sounds in classical music, you're probably thinking of a timpani. It is four ridiculously large drums, usually four, placed around, and they have little pedals on them so you can tune it. And each one is pitched, and you usually have sheet music with pitches on it, and you're going to play the right notes, and you can tune them on the fly if need be, but most music tends to write for four notes, assuming you have four timpanis, and that's it. You don't need to tune during the song. But yeah, those were in there. Other general stuff like cymbals, snare, bass drum. But what was really cool, and I don't. This is the one instrument that I don't think really fits into the visual that I had, but was ever present, and that's the triangle. It was everywhere, and I love it. It actually had a lot of prominence in the mix and in the composition itself. I'm not sure why, but it felt once you heard the triangle, it was really difficult not to. It was really difficult to unhear it, and every time it played, it sort of dominated my attention. Um, it has this. It has a brightness to it that I think works on occasion, but there are several places where it's a string of eighth notes, just back to back, like 3 to 5 of them. And it sort of acts as this rhythmic ringing in your ear, which is neat on a percussive area, but sort of annoying on an auditory one. And I said I didn't really have anything negative to say, and I don't think there is anything negative about the triangle. I think the part itself is fine. It might just be a production thing. It might be EQ'd a little too high in this recording. I don't know. Maybe it was too close to the mic. It's just very potent, and it is a single tone that gets played a lot. And it's my only questionable element of this. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Some sections it worked beautifully, other times, especially at the end, it's like they just put the stick in between. It's like just constantly. It's just a bit much at times. But I love that it was included. You know, at the beginning, I was like, "Hey, I hear you, triangle guy," and yeah, because the triangle is just such an overlooked instrument, especially like it kind of gets jokey. You know, I feel like a lot of people make jokes at the expense of playing the triangle as if it's not a real instrument or something. But it is legit a cornerstone of auxiliary percussion and or in this case orchestral percussion. Um, and I'm glad it had prominence here at some level. I don't know if I necessarily want to go down the line of all the instruments and their inclusion and roles. I think we can just kind of sum this up real quick that the brass was primarily big and punchy and vibrant. They didn't really have any swirling or legato elements. The woodwind section was primarily used for legato and foundational elements. The strings were melody and, well, they were everything. Smetana just really loved the strings on this composition. They were melody, they were foundation, they were atmospheric, they did the motif. They're the Swiss Army knife of this track. And then we have the percussion, who did the percussion stuff. They kept the time and had all the neat extra timbres to add into the piece. But what I do want to talk about is the variety of sound, particularly from the violins. Or the string section in general. We got to hear some plucking, we got to hear some bowing, we got to hear some quick playing, some long playing, we got to hear swells. And once again, like, I don't have all of this variety to talk about for other instruments. It's the violins really have a lot of Smetana's attention on this track. And I'm curious if that's consistent through his writing, or if it was just this specific song that he felt the strings needed to lead. If there was something that needed to be done, it almost feels like they were the first choice. Maybe a second choice if there was something very specific. Like at the beginning, the violins would have been too aggressive to introduce our flurry motif. So instead, it would have been too aggressive for the opening, which was supposed to be light and very almost whimsical, agile, though. Definitely has this dexterous vibe to it, and that's why I gave it to the flutes. But the violins still got to come in with their plucked playing. So yeah, it just feels overall like the violin is the key instrument. And if they can't particularly do something as well as another, then the idea gets passed on to another group. But the violins, like I said, they feel like they get first pick on everything. Um, Going on the idea of sheer variety, though, I love the dynamic elements in this track. We have the movement from light on your feet and dexterous to full-bodied adventure to almost like a dark insecurity, anxiety possibly, and then to a victorious ending. There's a lot of almost like a congratulatory element to the final section of this track. We also have contrast in volume, not even just that this section's quiet and this section is loud, which is typically how rock and metal deals with volume contrast, but the fact that there's so many little micro swells in here, whether it's a single instrument going from a loud note to a soft note, or even moving between them. Again, cycles of highs and lows all over the place. Or the full band starting soft and getting big, and then starting big and getting small. And it's just, the song feels like it's breathing. It feels organic. That nature element that I feel does start from my perception of the introductory motif as wind, but it is also just a massive part of the song as a whole. It is constantly in and out. It's the cycle of breathing. Oh, dang, that cycle of breathing metaphor actually works for a lot of this track. Yeah, I'm glad I made that observation. That was not something I pre-planned. That's something I landed into. But it's quite appropriate. Anyways, though, the swelling of the volume. We have swelling of width as well, where we'll have sections that start out with just a couple instruments and slowly build into larger ones. We have sections where instruments will pass off ideas, and maybe we'll start with a big brassy concept that gets shifted over into a column response with woodwinds. So we have this massive sound with a smaller sound that also brings about typically some volume dynamics as well. And it's just this, it's a breathing thing. It's like an accordion. Does an accordion use air? Is that how it works? I don't know why my mind just went to that. The accordion goes like this. Is that because it's bringing air in and pushing air out? Is that how that works? Why do I not know how an accordion works? I gotta educate myself on that. I'm gonna make a note real quick. I would pause, but it's gonna take a second. How does accordion work? I'm open for what are those things called? Comments too. If you want to let me know in the comments section how an accordion works, if it is air based, because that would mean it's an aerophone. Wow. Okay. But yeah, just this whole idea of breathing, and the dynamic elements of that, the breathing in versus the breathing out, the stopping versus the growth, the flow, the natural ebb and flow of breathing, like all of this shines through this track in almost every aspect, from the minutia, looking at a single swelling idea in a single instrument, to the bigger picture of volume rises of the full band, to even the most bird's eye view of this track, where we can look at the song as starting small, getting bigger, coming back down small to the anxious section, and rising back up for our final conclusion before coming back down to just a couple of flutes, was it? Doing our final chord progression to resolve the song into a big orchestral stinger to actually finish the song out. The entire track is full of these really large sweeping movements, and also more minute sweeping movements as well throughout there, where maybe on the larger scale it starts small and gets big, but there's micro movements in between those two key points. It is just masterful. I think that's a word we can use for this. Masterful. We are listening to a master's work. Now, moving along with the little story I have in my head, which is this leaf falling and being caught by the wind and being pulled on this adventure. We start out with just the light movement in the flutes with the plucked violin, and it sort of just is. We have this flurry of sounds, and it's, the spiraling of a leaf, and then it gets caught on a draft of wind. I don't know if that's a phrase people say. A draft of wind, and gets carried along on an adventure. And this is where the song starts to open up. We get the chord progressions, the brass comes in, the percussion section comes in, and we have these beautiful moving lines and atmospheres being crafted, so many ideas, and it is just very adventurous. And it's get to see all these cool things, the leaf just on the wind, exploring sections it's never seen before. It's only been a homebody. It's only ever existed on its tree before. It's never seen outside of its tree, and now it's got to open the door down and jump on the highway and see what the world has. Nature's highway, that's what wind is. Oh, Brian, this is so bad. Um, and I love how it starts out adventurous. This is a brand new thing. This is kind of exciting, but we also get to explore this extra width and instrumentation in different atmospheres and emotions. There's also a bit of whimsy, there's calm, there's beauty in a lot of it, almost like the leaf is now used to the adventure and is now seeing things that are calming and serene. It's still big. It's still never seen a river before. But the leaf knows when it sees it, it's calming, it's beauty, it's nothing to be afraid of. And so the music is still large, but the emotion has shifted. It might be a family or a group of deer prancing through a valley. No, a prairie. That's more accurate, I think. and and the leaf is just metaphorically going, ah. And so the music reflects this. Eventually, though, we reach a low point. The music peters out into nothing. In fact, this is one of my favorite sections because if you listen real closely, we never hit pure silence. An instrument is still playing. It's just barely audible. It's just so quiet. I think I even whispered at that section because I didn't want to be too loud. According to my mixer, we were at about negative 57-ish dBs, and I run the music at negative 15. Um, so we were looking at a good 40, 40 dB difference. But there was still sound. That's the thing. It wasn't zeroed out. And even if it was zeroed out, that would just be what's being picked up. I guarantee somebody's playing there because I heard it. And it's just so quiet. And of course, eventually it builds and we begin to introduce these tense note intervals. At first, it's just sort of a one off, which I thought was kind of neat. It's one note out of this melody that's just a hair bit off. Not quite sure what that's about. And then it happens again. And then again. And then we fully land in a chord that is tense. And like, oh, this is getting dark. This is going somewhere. I don't necessarily have a vision for exactly what happened here. My best approximation could be that the leaf was dropped somewhere, the wind stopped, and maybe it was a place that was frightening to the leaf. I don't know what that would be. I am not a leaf. I don't know what leaves are scared of, but that general idea of everything kind of dying down, including the wind. The highway has ceased to exist for a moment. And the leaf now knows not what to do. Its whole life has been sitting in a tree on a branch, and then it was falling, and now it's gotten used to falling. That was pretty cool. I got to see some new stuff, but now I'm just sitting here on the ground. Is this what the rest of my life is? I don't know. There's like all this anxiety setting in, this darkness, and it's really interesting how we utilize a flurry, a whirlwind, one of those rising and falling techniques to pull out of this back into what I felt was a victorious ending about 10 minutes into this track. And my only reading of that is that the wind came back, or a new wind came through and picked up the leaf and brought it on the next stretch. And the leaf felt that it might have had a hand in this and felt victorious in moving again. I don't know. And then, of course, here we start bringing in more brass stingers, and it's just a very triumphant moment. The whirlwind is back. The triangle is going off like it'll never get hit again. It's just playing constantly. The violins are doing everything. The whirlwinds are giving us, I mean, the woodwinds are giving us the whirlwinds. It is just a big moment, and you can feel it. The emotional connection here is just palpable. There was despair, and now there is triumph. We have overcome this hurdle. That is exactly what those moments tell me. And then we kind of move towards a couple of resolutions, choose to not fully resolve on any of them. Spend, I don't know, 8-16 bars of these half cadences before shifting down to just, I think it was the flutes, right? And doing the same idea of leading chords into leading chords into leading chords. We never finish it. It just gets quieter and quieter and quieter. Then we start this rising idea where we keep inching closer and closer and closer to the resolution and then never hitting it. and then finally landing on it. And it's so good. Bump! And then we get the orchestral stinger. Why? Oh man, I'm sorry if that was too loud. I don't know how to control myself when I'm talking about music. I don't understand this ending. There is a type of acceptance that I kind of feel in bringing the music back down, right? And allowing the leaf to realize its purpose, maybe even. The point of a falling leaf is that the tree is it dying? Is that, I know there's a cycle where the trees lose their leaves in the fall and then they have no leaves in the winter and then they grow them back, but I don't know if they're dead. But anyways, the leaves fall down to the ground and eventually they die as well, since they no longer have the connection to their sustenance. The roots of the tree going into the ground to pull out nutrients and stuff. And the leaf eventually dies on the ground and decomposes and becomes the nutrients for the cycle to start again. And I kind of get this idea of acceptance right here, where the wind starts to die down, the power of the band starts to die down. We have just the flutes, which the very beginning of the song, this was the little bit of wind that picked up the leaf, kind of pushed it around a little bit, had it disconnect from the tree, and caught it. And it slowly lets the leaf down and plants it on the ground, and the leaf understands what its purpose is in the circle of life. And eventually we hit this point of clairvoyance. This gorgeous chord wraps everything up. And then we get two more orchestral stingers to resolve the song again, but loudly this time. And at least in my interpretation of the song, I don't get it. It is comical. Smetana just can't leave it be. The song can't end. We need more fake endings. But on a more serious level, I don't get it. And I think that's fine. I'm not even going to say that my reading of this leaf's journey is the authorial intent. I'm not even going to say it's what most people experience through it. This is just my interpretation of the music I listen to. All the beautiful ideas, composition techniques, orchestration coming together to tell me this gorgeous story. But those are just my thoughts. What did you think of this track? Voltana by Smetana. What did you think of it? Did you enjoy it? Did anything stand out to you that maybe I didn't touch on? Do you disagree with something I said or have your own perspective on things? I asked a couple of questions throughout the reaction and analysis as well. If you have answers to those or any of the other opinions or anything you just want to type, put it down in the comments. Above that is a description box and there's a link for Linktree. Takes you to this menu right here. Has ways to support the channel. You can listen to my music. There's a link to the Discord server. There's just a bunch of stuff in there. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. We will continue on tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. We'll continue on with Women of Music, looking at art that has been contributed by women in honor of Women History Month and International Women's Day. All right, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.